Hello, welcome to Ukraine Today. Now, joining us in the studio is Maksym Yakovlev. He's an international policy analyst and associate professor at the Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Maksym, thank you very much for coming into our studios today.
Thank you for inviting.
So recently, Ukraine Week in the European Parliament finished. Lots of diplomatic talk, lots of meetings going on. And one of the main things that came out of this was a report by the former European Parliament President, Pete Cox, who came out with recommendations for Ukraine to improve the parliamentary system. So you've read this report. What were the main points in your point of view?
Yes, I'm glad that the thing that started actually in Brussels, it was not just about presenting Ukraine to the Europe and to European audience, as we say here in Ukraine, but it was also about giving some recommendation to the Verkhovna Rada and how it should function, especially after the last failed voting on non-confidence to the cabinet of ministers of Ukraine. But Pete Cox, and he's because he presented a number of interesting points with an interesting group of people. And, okay, the report in itself might seem to be boring, but what I liked about them is that on some pages, in the boxes, they even highlighted the most important stuff of their recommendations.
And what was this? What were these recommendations that you read?
I think for any political scientist in Europe, they might seem to be rather obvious. Like, for example, to reduce the number of committees in the Verkhovna Rada, but to make them more accountable, more responsible. That is something you would expect of any function of a parliament everywhere in the world, and especially the Verkhovna Rada is a parliament. And for any viable democracy, you need a fully functional parliament that has the power to do so.
So he was saying that it kind of lacks efficiency, that there's a lot of initiatives.
Well, for example, languages. They highlighted that we need to invest money and resources into developing the personnel, so to speak. So even languages and education and like that. So there was also highlighted in bold. So generally, I would say that the recommendations are interesting. They are rather practical and doable, I would say.
And so that was one. What about the other recommendations that he gave for Ukrainian parliamentarians?
Well, I think, I think you can advise the parliament as an institution, but in order to advise every single parliament member, so MP, you would have to advise all 450 of them. So they didn't go that far. But the general, even tone or the language of the report is about responsibility, is about cooperation, is also about efficiency and efficacy. So in different forms. I wouldn't say that the report is about every single member of parliament, but it's also about the institution as such. And but as said, I think it's possible to implement them. And my first reaction when I read some of the points, like exactly this responsibility and how it all should function, is that it is something that should have been done long ago. So I really have the hopes that after the Brussels Ukrainian Week, some things would finally be implemented.
I see. And was it a positive report, or was it quite negative in some areas?
Well, I think, generally, because I had the pleasure of meeting Pete Cox last year and moderating a discussion with him here at Kyiv, I think that it's great to think that people like him maintain this connection to Ukraine. They come to Ukraine regularly. They are in Ukrainian context, so they understand how things are going here. And I guess that, I'm persuaded by reading the report, the general tone is very positive. And when by the way, thus I came across his very short interview translated in German. And he said that you can really feel the tension in the parliament. You can see the tension between different Ukrainian authorities and institutions. But despite that, there is a hope for development. And he also admits that we have done a great deal in advancing the democracy.
Well, that's true, because since the Euromaidan revolution, there's been more done than in the 20 years previous.
True,
and in the report, he was quite positive about this as well.
Yes.
I did read one interesting article, actually, after these meetings took place, and it was actually something that Yuri Lutsenko said. He's the chairman of Petro Poroshenko's bloc in the parliament, and he said that there were 6 reasons why EU's this visa regime with Ukraine is still far away. He said, for example, about sanctions, like European businesses were tired of this. Also, we have the refugee influx across Europe. True. And still corruption is a big problem as well. So in your point of view, is the Parliament doing enough? Do you think there's a lot of talk and ink being signed here, but what's the chance that the parliamentarians are going to listen to this advice? that's coming from Europe?
So all the points you've mentioned, all of them are of crucial importance. Like fighting corruption is still a big deal because this country is unfortunately to some extent corrupt in some spheres. But the parliament has been doing a great deal of work. But again, my reaction when I read something that finally this law has been adopted and we wait for the president to sign it, and then the next point is effective implementation, that this law is really working. And one of the things that has been criticized for example, for this visa-free regime is this e-declaration, so electronic declarations. And it's so funny because in Brussels there was some meetings, it was so funny, like, I forgot the surname of this lady was explaining, I think to Ukrainska Pravda, the logic that why would I have to write down that all like my incomes or even my jewelries, where I come from, and then what is then the criminal responsibility if I do not declare them in my declaration that I possess them? So all this funny stuff, but to fight corruption we need some very harsh measures. And I think that, well, it's a philosophical question, scientific question, how much the pressure from outside, this external pressure, how much can that provide for a viable democracy in a particular given country, in Ukrainian case. But like answering your question in general, I can really feel the skepticism of Ukraine being provided with a visa-free regime because of the migrant crisis, because the corruption, we can still do much more on corruption.
Well, there's a lot of work to do. It takes years to untangle a lot of these corruption schemes.
Yes, and dedication. And also new people and new faces. We can admit that if the police reform and law enforcement, this is something quite successful and people like it. But on like the prosecution office and the prosecution and all the court system of Ukraine, might say that, for example, prosecution, many people claim that this reform was not successful, or the court system of Ukraine.
But is it because there's a lot of expectation among the Ukrainian public after the revolution?
First, expectation. Second, there's also a lot of internal resistance. Changing institutions, especially law enforcement and things like that, is always very problematic because you make some people redundant, then you have to do something with them. Provide them with some jobs, but then you need a whole new, to educate a judge takes at least 5 years of good, law school, legal school. Then you need some years of expertise for that person to work, and to change that, or to educate new people, really takes time, and as I said, dedication as well.
And these recommendations that came from Brussels, what would be the result in Ukraine? How would Ukrainians, or Ukraine's parliament change, the Ukrainian society change as a result of these changes in the parliament itself? Because to the ordinary person, it might seem very technocratic, a lot of political jargon, but what are the real results that people are expecting?
Interesting, I will start from backwards. The word technocrat in Ukraine, it definitely has both positive and negative connotations, but I think that Ukrainian people would definitely like to see professional bureaucrats. And if we use technocrat to denote a professional bureaucrat who does not belong to any political party, who might personally favor a certain political figure, but who is really unbiased and who is doing his or her job properly, irrespective of what is going on in the country, is something this country, the Ukraine, really needs. But on the other hand, I believe that we also need people who share the same values and ideas, and this is how politics function. So you vote for a person who represents your values and then brings it forward into the parliament. Answering your question in the simplistic way, yes, Ukraine after Maidan demonstrates that external pressure is rather successful. Well, for one reason, we need external funding and support because we are in a very difficult financial situation and condition, but I really hope for the positive influence, and I think meetings like that are crucially important because the Western Europeans in Brussels or the European Union as a functioning body, really shows and demonstrate, you need to change this, you need to do that, and I think they have a positive influence.
That's true, but they're just recommendations as well, aren't they? It's not like Brussels is telling Ukraine what
I read
it
a
should
very
be
interesting
doing.
article about that, saying that you can just advise on how to do things, but the Europeans, they cannot potentially even do things for us. So we as Ukrainians need to take our own responsibility, and as I would use this word again, to show a dedication to changing our country for good.
Yeah, and in Brussels, it's good that Ukraine is still on the agenda because there's so many things that they're dealing with. You have economic problems and unemployment. You have the refugee crisis as well.
Yes.
So to put Ukraine again on the agenda can only be positive, can't it?
On 3rd of March, there was on BBC News, and there's a very short report on the war in the east of Ukraine. And the journalists even used this word, the forgotten war, because there's so many things going on in Europe that we just, like his claim also, he just named this word, forgotten war, because there's so many things going on. And I definitely agree with you. We need to have Ukraine on the agenda. So, and the people in Brussels do not forget about us in that respect. So I think that is one of the most positive things as well. So people talk about Ukraine and...
Okay, perfect. Well, Maksym, thank you very much for coming into our studios and talking about Ukraine in the future European Union, hopefully at some point.
Hopefully. Thank you.
You've been watching Viewpoint on Ukraine today. That was Maksym Yakovlev. He's an international policy analyst and associate professor of the Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Now, back to the news.